Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In a rather exciting turn of events, Microsoft have just officially announced the sequel to Microsoft Flight Simulator. Next year we're expecting to see Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, and according to Microsoft themselves, this is going to be a brand new sequel. It's not an update to Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. Quote unquote, we are expecting to see an all new sim. The official trailer for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 has just been released. You can see that on the screens in front of you. And so I thought in today's video we'd work our way through the trailer, we'll discuss what we see along the way. Certainly at the moment this announcement seems to be fairly vague on the details, and I see it's left a lot of people with a lot of questions. We're going to see here what we can glean from the trailer, and then at the end of the video we'll discuss a few points. My conclusions at the end will be speculative in nature, but as a lifelong simmer and real-world pilot, based as well on my previous experiences with various Microsoft Flight Simulator sims, I think we can make some reasonable assertions. I'll also run through a few talking points and discuss my own personal thoughts on Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. So first things first, we're just going to let the trailer here play through in its entirety so that you can see everything as it's intended to be seen. Without a doubt, as I'm sure is abundantly clear to all of you, the sim is looking absolutely stunning, but we will talk about that more as we go. We're going to be breaking things down here frame by frame. We'll discuss what we can see and what I think that means for the future of the sim. As always, ladies and gents, I do hope you enjoy the video. If you do, then please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. So starting then with the first frame that we really see here in the video, stating that Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 is going to be the next generation of Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's still not entirely obvious at the moment exactly what that's meant by Microsoft, but certainly they are very clear that this will be a new sequel to the franchise. It's not going to be an update to Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, as we saw with the Game of the Year edition. Microsoft are calling this an all-new sim. And so whilst it hasn't been confirmed yet, I think it's reasonable to assume this is going to be an all-new purchase as well. I do have my own thoughts on that, but again, we'll run through the trailer first, we'll discuss my thoughts at the end of the video. Next up, in the trailer we see a screen stating, "Pursue your dream of a career in aviation." Certainly going off the trailer, there does seem to be a real emphasis in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 of flying missions and various scenarios. To my mind, that's a very welcome addition. I certainly enjoyed these sorts of scenarios in Microsoft Flight Simulator X. At the moment, there's no details as far as I'm aware in terms of what the career development and structure would actually be like. But going off previous sims and the way that Microsoft Flight Simulator generally works, I would expect it would be a more single mission based scenario. I don't expect we're going to see quite the level of depth or fidelity that we see from the likes of FS Economy, Air Hauler, career add-on programs of that nature. I think for many of us though, myself included, it's really nice to have a purpose in the sim. It's nice to have that extra immersion of having a challenge and a task to carry out. Again, we'll discuss more about this at the end of the video. My only hope here is that the sim doesn't become too gamified as a result of this career progression. The first actual shot of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 that we get to see looks to be some sort of in-game firefighting scenario. It's worth noting, of course, that Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 is currently still a work in progress, so I'm sure we can expect certain things to change here as the sim develops. As you can see though from the caption at the bottom of the screen, this is in-game footage, and a few things I think worth noting here. Firstly, and probably most obviously, the smoke effects look really excellent. I would imagine these sorts of firefighting scenarios are going to be fairly canned, but it would be really great if we could see real-world forest fires based on actual climatic conditions. Speaking of the climate, it is a little bit hard to tell in this screenshot, but it looks as though the weather simulation has once again had a bit of a rework. It looks to me there as though we've got some cirrus cloud modelled, which is great if that's the case. It looks as well as though the shaders within Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 have been perhaps slightly adjusted. I would say here the scene looks slightly more photorealistic. Next, again actual in-game footage. We have a scene here with a CL-415 carrying out some aerial firefighting work. More on the CL-415 in just a moment, but I think it's worth noting here, firstly the trees look to be incredibly detailed. You'll notice throughout the trailer that the scenery does look generally very detailed, much more so than Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. I think some of that is selective editing, making use of custom scenery, but as you'll see in a later shot, it does look as though these will be the default trees. The fire animations there as well look very nice. My only real criticism here with the scene would be the lighting. Once again, the sky looking a little bit like some sort of a nuclear flash. Overexposure under certain lighting conditions has always been an issue in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Whilst it can look very beautiful and of course very cinematic, it's not necessarily all that realistic. So a clearer shot now of the CL415 and confirmation, as you can see, that we do have aerial firefighting missions included in the update. Once again, those trees and the fire animations look beautiful. The same goes for the water drop animation. And I think it's worth touching on the CL415 as well. There is already one available for the sim. At a first glance, this does look to be the same version of the aircraft, and you'll notice throughout the trailer there do seem to be quite a few aircraft included that are already currently available. So that certainly raises a few questions. Of course, we're wondering if these aircraft are going to be included for free. We'll touch on that more during the conclusion, but certainly if these sorts of aircraft are going to be included for free, that is going to be a slightly bitter pill to swallow perhaps for those who have already purchased them previously. A quick video shot here again of the CL415 flyby. I think the things worth noting, again, the fire animation is excellent, the water drop animation is excellent. The aircraft sounds superb as well during the flyby. I don't know whether or not that effect is achieved through editing, or perhaps we're going to see somewhat of an overhaul of the sound engine in the sim as well. Next up, we have our first look at the new additional helicopter missions within the sim. Once again, the scenery fidelity is absolutely excellent. I'm pretty sure there, though, we're looking at some custom scenery, and I think throughout most of the rest of the video we're going to see custom scenery that's been very selectively shot for the trailer. We do see the detailed trees. The rock outcrops are already available in the sim, typically again used in custom scenery. I can't imagine those will be placed throughout the world. We're obviously looking at some sort of rescue flight scenario here, and it's great to see that we have a working winchman, as well as the little details here like the crashed vehicle. They really all add to the immersion in the sim. The most noteworthy features to my mind, firstly we have the custom avatars. The animation as well, as you can see on the avatars, is really top notch. Everything looking very lifelike, and as well it looks as though the trees can actually be blown by the downwash from the rotors. So in terms of detailing and again immersion, that certainly bodes very well for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. In the next scene we have some sort of oil rig delivery or rescue scenario. Superb detailing on the oil rig there, and I wonder whether or not they're making use of the Aerosoft oil rigs that we saw in the North Sea add-on. Not too much to point out in this particular scene, again just highlighting the detailing on the rig model. And I think it's also worth noting that the water textures and animations look to be identical more or less to what we've seen in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. Again, we'll talk more about it later on, but whilst this is touted as being a brand new sim, to me it does look to be more of an evolution as opposed to a revolution. You can certainly see a lot of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 DNA throughout the trailer. Here it looks as though we're looking at the same helicopter we saw with the mountain rescue scenario. It looks to be a new addition to the sim. Once more, we do also have the custom avatar here, which I think is great. I've long been saying in many of my videos that we need to see more avatar options in the sim. The avatars that we have currently available in 2020 don't really offer up enough range to suit the broad depth of aircraft that we have available in the sim. Once more, in this particular scene, it has to be said, very nice lighting. It's also interesting to see here the avatar external to the aircraft. Later on in the trailer, it definitely looks as though we're going to be free to roam external from the aircraft itself. Essentially, it looks as though we're going to have a walking mode within the sim, which would be nice to see. I know that many of you were quite keen to have that as an option. One short animation that I thought was worth pointing out, it's being very nitpicky, hopefully things will be fixed up before the sim is released, but it looks to be as though the tail rotor animation here is actually in the reverse sense. Just a small modelling error here at the end of the day, of course, but I thought it was still worth bringing up, only because I'm sure that many of you are concerned with the addition of the missions and the career progression. Hopefully, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 isn't going to become too much of a game. Hopefully, Asobo are still going to be focusing on the platform as a sim, and focusing on the details that really matter, the flight modelling, the aerodynamics. Again, it's a minor detail, and I'm sure it will get fixed up. The next shot, really I just wanted to highlight a couple of points here. Firstly, it looks as though we're still using the default avionics in some of these new additional aircraft, which we would expect to see. I don't have any issues with that personally, especially since the default avionics in the sim have been going from strength to strength. The other feature that I wanted to point out, this particular screenshot would suggest that we have 3D avatars now within the virtual cockpit. A little bit tricky to say there, as it is easy for the sake of these sorts of videos to use the drone cam instead. The option does of course already exist within the sim, but very few developers, including Asobo, currently make use of it. So it would be really nice if that option has been added across the board. Again, for the sake of immersion, just having a 3D pilot model, whether that's in the pilot seat, the co-pilot seat, or a passenger down the back, again it just ramps up the immersion a little bit more. Helicopter ops certainly seem to feature quite heavily in the trailer. We've seen already the medical operations, as well it looks like there's sling delivery cargo operations. Another quick piece of video footage here is it seems to highlight the fact that the sling physics has actually been modelled, which is great to see. That should definitely make for some challenging flying. The animations as well look really nice. Here is a very interesting scene for those of you who are into your commercial jets. Interestingly, commercial aviation seems to feature pretty minimally in the trailer. Obviously, Microsoft Flight Simulator has brought in a whole new demographic, and many of you enjoy a more casual flight within the sim. But traditionally, where most people's interest lies with flight simming is with the commercial jets. So I am perhaps a little bit surprised that we didn't see more coverage of that here in the video. And again, whilst I don't think it is, it could be just the slightest hint there that Microsoft and Asobo are taking the sim in a slightly more gamey direction. The aircraft in the foreground is quite interesting though. That looks to be an A330. Obviously, we don't know at the moment whether or not that's going to be AI traffic or an aircraft included within the sim. Even if this is just an AI traffic model, it's great to see that the AI traffic looks to have been overhauled. The current generic A330-esque aircraft that the sim uses is pretty hideous, to be frank. Interesting as well here that we see real-world liveries. I believe at Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020's inception we were told we were going to get real-world traffic and real-world liveries. That never really came to fruition. I presume as well it would be pretty tricky to sort out with the licensing. This particular screenshot would seem to suggest that we are going to get real-world liveries within the sim, but it may well be that we're only seeing third-party liveries. This could even perhaps be a hint at the online platform that Asobo have been promising for some time now, whereby both PC users and Xbox users alike can download third-party content. Another quick demonstration here of the avatar modelling. There really is an excellent level of attention to detail in terms of the modelling, the texturing, but particularly with the animation. I really hope this is representative of what we're going to see in the sim, but I suspect in reality, again, this is probably a little bit of trickery during editing. In the next segment of the video, we have a very clear indication that we are going to be able to walk around outside and external to the aircraft. Once again, we have a custom avatar that fits very nicely, and it looks here as though we have the Embraer 200 Ipanema, which again is an aircraft you can currently purchase within Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, which does lead me quite strongly to believe that they're going to be potentially, I think, included within the sim. Once more, the scenery detail is absolutely excellent, but I suspect this will be, again, custom scenery, so not representative of the entire world within Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. Bar the trees, the vegetation looks to be very similar to what we have currently in 2020, and unfortunately it looks as though with 2024, Asobo is still refusing to cut the grass. It goes without saying at this point, but once again, lovely graphical detailing, lovely texturing and lighting. It looks as though we do have working aircraft systems in terms of the spray operation, although again I believe this may be included with the current third-party version of the Ipanema. This video clip again would suggest as well that we have avatar models within the cockpit, and as a quick glance there as well, you may notice we've even got what looks to be custom crops for the crop dusting scenarios, so again, really great level of detail, lots of nice little additions that really ramp up that immersion. Back to helicopter operations again, which seem to feature pretty heavily in the trailer. Next it looks as though we have some sort of mountain rescue mission. There's not really a whole lot more to cover here that we haven't already talked about. The scenery looks amazing, but again I suspect those rock outcrops are custom scenery for the scenario. Even in the background though, the terrain does look to be pretty highly detailed, lots of definition, very sharp edges. Hopefully we'll see some sort of overhaul of the terrain engine. It would be nice of course to see more detailed mesh and certainly get rid of the pop-in that we see a lot now within Microsoft Flight Simulator. Another quick video clip, this time highlighting skydive operations. It looks as though we have, again, very nicely animated 3D avatars down the back of the aircraft for the skydive. They will actually depart the aircraft and indeed look to be very nicely animated as well on the way down. Again though, you can see a lot of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 DNA in this particular scene. It looks as though we're making use of the default Cessna 208. It looks as well as though we're flying over the Bora Bora scenery. So to my mind, that would really suggest that 2024 is going to be building on what we already have within FS 2020. And that would certainly make sense, as that's the way that Microsoft have really done things with their Flight Simulator franchise since the outset. Next up, we have yet another helicopter scenario, this time featuring the Sikorsky S-64 Skycrane. Once again, worth noting that it looks as though we have sling physics modelled. That's going to make for some really challenging flying within the sim. You can see just the amount of precision that would be required here to move the pylon into place. As before, I am left wondering whether or not the S-64 is going to be included in the sim by default. I would assume so, since it's included here in the trailer. The level of detail displayed once again in this particular scene is exceptional. Firstly, the detailing on the pylon itself. You can see as well we've got some logging taking place down in the left of the screenshot. But as we've discussed in the previous scenarios, I'm fairly certain this will be customised for this particular mission. Again, I don't think we'll be seeing this level of detail throughout the Microsoft Flight Simulator world. Even the pylon there I suspect is custom for this particular mission. Once more, the colour palette looking just that little bit more muted, and therefore I think the scene looking that bit more realistic as well. The next one is an interesting shot, quite a few things to break down here. Firstly, and most obviously of course, it looks as though we have the Airbus Beluga, or perhaps the Beluga XL. I believe that AnyBuilds currently make a Beluga, so it's quite possible that they might bring one across to the sim, given that they brought the A310 to us within Microsoft Flight Simulator. I think it is the XL variant of the Beluga. So far as I'm aware, nobody's brought one of those into the sim yet, and given that we saw the A330 earlier on during the video, it would perhaps suggest that Asobo have got a dev working on multiple variants of the A330 for the new sim. I thought it was worth touching on the pilot avatar again here as well. The walking animation didn't look quite so slick in this particular clip. Still not bad by any means, but certainly not as detailed as we saw with the rescue worker avatars, for example. Hopefully, again, another little detail that will be fixed up before the sim is released. You can see that the avatar seems to have the same headgear on here as he would on the aircraft, so wearing our headset here on the ramp, which doesn't really make any sense. As with the previous scene, the next one depicts some sort of cargo delivery operation. Interesting for sure, and in this particular scenario we're looking at cargo delivery into a remote location. Detailing is superb. You can see, for example, there the snow effects on the snowmobile, as well as a small amount of ice forming there around the windshield of the aircraft. Touching on the aircraft, it's the A400M, which again is currently available for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. It's also made by the same developer as the CL415. So I think that does offer up a pretty strong suggestion that Asobo is currently working with a number of third-party developers to bring new aircraft into Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. We've seen them do that multiple times, of course, already within 2020. My only slight reservation here with both the CL415 and the A400M, neither of the aircraft are the most detailed, the most well-polished of products. So I really hope that Asobo and the developers are going to be refining these particular aircraft before they come into the sim. It would be a real shame if we had a whole raft of new aircraft that were actually somewhat substandard versus the default options. Just very briefly, we also have VIP charter service operations, again another nice reason to fly within the sim. It looks here as though we're using the default DA62, I think that might be the default St. Bart's scenery as well. So once more making use of plenty of current Microsoft Flight Simulator assets. Nice little touches there though with the custom car, the custom red carpet. I think if we are going to have the ability to walk around within the sim though, the pilot avatar animation still needs some work. Currently from what I've seen here, the pilots still have that slightly uncomfortable look with their arms out to the sides. It looks as though we're also going to be getting Red Bull styled racing events. Those could certainly be really good fun, a nice opportunity as well for some community events. I think though that this particular section of the video rather typifies for me how great something can look in a trailer versus what you might actually see in the real world. We've obviously got some pretty funky camera angles here and some nice motion blur as well. The whole scene looks very dynamic and very exciting, but if you've flown the default extra within the sim, it's not really something to get too excited about. Once more, worth noting that we do see the interior 3D avatar. And given that we've seen that 3 or 4 times now, I'm really hoping that we do see that in the sim, otherwise again I feel that's slightly misleading editing here for the trailer. Another nice custom pilot avatar though, again excellent lighting, and air racing does seem to be an obvious addition to the sim. Certainly doesn't take much work for a developer to create the course. It's a nice way of putting your aerobatic skills to good use, and as I say I think it'd be great fun as well to compete against your fellow simmers. Perhaps one of the most intriguing shots throughout the video, here we have what looks to be a fully developed tornado. According to Asobo and or Microsoft, this is part of a scientific research scenario. I would imagine in reality the scenario is going to be fairly canned once again, probably just flying within a set proximity of the tornado itself, perhaps snapping a few shots, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment's time. For me, it's the tornado itself that's the most interesting aspect. Again, I would love to know whether or not this is specific only to the scenario, or whether or not we're going to see more dynamic weather within the sim. I'm sure that the weather engine will continue to be developed, and it would be great if we could see these sorts of weather phenomena forming naturally based off the climatic conditions. Worth noting, once more, the sky is very oversaturated in this particular shot. I would like to see Asobo address that personally, but again, I appreciate it does make the sim look that much more cinematic. You can see here that the DA62 has been fitted out with a camera for our scientific research mission. As I postulated with the previous screenshot, I suspect the gist of the mission here would be to capture some sort of video or photo footage of the tornado as it unfolds. That could be good fun though, and I think photography missions in general could be quite good fun within the sim. And it would of course certainly be very interesting as well to see what sort of effects we might actually encounter on the aircraft should we approach the tornado too closely. In the next shot we see the Gotfriends Astro 1. Again, rather interesting here as the Astro 1 is currently available as a payware aircraft. Its inclusion in the trailer would suggest to me that it will be included within the sim. I guess we'll have to wait for developers to start confirming whether or not this is going to be the case. But as a customer, you probably are going to be more reticent to purchase any products for the sim at the moment, given that you may well find them included within Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 at a later date. After that, we're shown a scene with 3 A10s running down the Grand Canyon, and there I think the scenery does look a little bit more detailed versus what you currently see in 2020. This particular clip is apparently a hypothetical low altitude training scenario, but if I was to guess, I assume there's not going to be too much depth here. It's probably going to be much like the Top Gun Maverick training scenarios that we've seen in the sim to date. Essentially flying a route from A to B, keeping below a certain altitude as you go. Obviously, as well, the sim has a policy with no weapons being modelled on any aircraft included by default. So no GAL-8 here on the A10, which is a bit of a shame. The inclusion of the A10 as well seems a bit of a strange choice, given that the GAL-8 is such an iconic part of the aircraft. Another short video clip featuring this time the FlightFX Vision Jet. Once more, I wonder if that's going to be included within the sim, and if it is, then there's not really much incentive to purchase it at the moment. Hopefully devs are going to clarify this as a point fairly quickly, otherwise again I think a lot of us are going to be left wondering about whether we purchase certain add-ons. The main reason I included this particular video footage though is it does confirm we're getting seasons within the sim finally, which will be nice to see. Although that has been promised for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, so if it turns out that 2024 is going to be a paid upgrade, I certainly hope that we'll see the seasons carried across as well to FS 2020. And this particular shot as well confirms for me that those highly detailed trees are going to be included throughout the world of Microsoft Flight Simulator. Very quickly, we're also shown a shot of a blimp flight or an airship tour within the sim. The scenery looking as spectacular as ever with a Microsoft Flight Simulator. But the addition of a blimp for me I find actually quite exciting. I really enjoyed the high performance group hot air balloon within the sim. But it is sometimes just that little bit slow, and not being able to entirely control your direction can be slightly frustrating. I think the airship is an absolutely perfect option for exploring the beautiful scenery at a leisurely pace but in some sort of controlled fashion. Speaking of hot air balloons, it looks as though we're going to be getting those in the sim as well. It's a little bit tricky to tell in this screenshot, but it doesn't look to me as though it's using the high performance group hot air balloon. So perhaps Asobo or another developer is making a custom one for the sim. Once more though, a lovely option within the sim, a really nice way of cruising around and enjoying the scenery. Great as well, as you can see, for a multiplayer option with friends. Once more, we have a really nice detailed vista here. We have custom trees, for example, and those trees seem to fit in geographically with the location. Same as well here with the grass, that looks to have been custom coloured, which looks excellent. You'll notice off in the distance though, the scenery there is different in colour. So once more, it's difficult to know whether or not we're looking at a custom location here that isn't representative of the greater sim world. Hopefully in this particular case, I would like to think we're looking at scenery that has been adjusted on a greater scale. But it may well be that we're looking at some sort of safari custom scenario within a certain location. The same with the wildlife, great to see more wildlife there, certainly much greater numbers than we've seen previously in the sim. And I always felt that Asobo missed a bit of a trick with the wildlife in the sim. It really makes the world feel much more dynamic when you randomly come across various animals. So as with the scenery itself, I hope that we're going to see more wildlife spread throughout the Microsoft Flight Simulator world, as opposed to them just being in specific locations based on specific scenarios. Anyway, that just about wraps up the trailer. Lastly, we're told that Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 is, rather unsurprisingly, going to be available in 2024. Nothing more specific there on the date at the moment, but I'm sure we'll get more details as the sim continues to progress. Anyway, that's a breakdown of the trailer itself. As I mentioned during the introduction, I think that the trailer, and indeed the announcement of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, is both a very exciting prospect, but it also brings up a lot of questions, most of which have yet to be answered. So as I say, just to conclude the video here, I'll give you my own thoughts on what I think the new sim is going to mean for us. So we'll cover off a few different topics here, not in any particular order other than the order that I thought about them as I worked my way through the video. Firstly, are we looking at some sort of expansion for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020? Is it going to be an upgrade? Is the sim going to be a new purchase? As far as costs go, Microsoft have yet to make that clear, but certainly they are very clear it will be an all-new simulator, a brand new sequel to the Microsoft Flight Simulator franchise. I would just take that though with a pinch of salt. It is obvious from looking at the sim footage that it isn't an entirely new sim. It's building a lot off what we already have in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. And that is very typical of the Microsoft Flight Simulator franchise. It's very rare that Microsoft will start an entirely new flight simulator from scratch. Generally speaking, each iteration builds off and improves upon the last version of the product. Ordinarily, I'm absolutely fine with that, especially when you've got a strong foundation, which I think it's fair to say that Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 provides. I'm fully expecting that 2024 will be a new purchase, since it is supposedly a quote-unquote new sim. But as I mentioned earlier on, I think that's going to be a pretty bitter pill to swallow for some. It used to be part of the course that Microsoft used to release a new sim every couple of years, so I don't take issue with paying for a new sim personally, but again, we were promised that 10-year life cycle, as well as features that we've yet to see in the current sim that look to have been included with 2024, so for example there, the dynamic seasons. It does also bring up some questions about how things are going to be priced, given that the new sim does seem to include a multitude of current payware third-party aircraft. On the subject of add-ons, I know that many of you have sunk a lot of money into third-party aircraft at this point, and are probably wondering whether or not they're going to be compatible with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. To be clear, this statement is just an assumption on my part based on previous history, so don't hold me to it. But I would be very surprised if there's not cross-compatibility between the two sims. Once more, you can tell that the two sims share a lot of the same coding under the hood. And both Microsoft and Asobo, I'm sure, are more than astute enough to realise that the current fanbase is going to be pretty upset if all of the add-ons that they purchased within the last couple of years no longer work within the sim. They would certainly be shooting themselves in the foot otherwise, and potentially ruining what has been a very successful and lucrative franchise for them to date. So again, I don't anticipate there being too many cross-platform issues between 2020 and 2024. That's not to say though that certain products might not need updating, and we may see certain devs charging for those updates. We have seen that previously in other sims. I would expect that Asobo is already working with the bigger devs to make sure that their add-ons are compatible with the new version of the sim. Touching on the 10-year support issue once again, it's pretty unclear at the moment as to how that's going to affect Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. There are still a number of features missing from the sim that we were either expecting or promised. It's pretty clear that some of those features will be included with 2024, certainly the seasons. As a result, at the very least, I would expect that any improvements brought to Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 should be brought back towards 2020 for any users choosing to stick with that particular platform. It would be a shame to somewhat split the franchise in two, but again, this has been fairly typical for Microsoft Flight Sims throughout the ages. And as we discussed just a moment ago, most developers chose to cover that entire range of Microsoft Flight Simulators, and most devs would provide support where needed to ensure that they did. Focusing a little bit more on FS 2024 itself, it's pretty clear going off the trailer that there's a real focus on both missions and a career progression within the sim. It looks pretty clear that we will have multiple new mission types as outlined during the trailer. Additional to that, it looks as though we're going to have custom avatars as well as the ability to walk around within the sim. It looks as well as though we're going to get quite a wide range of new aircraft available for the sim. Seasons will clearly be added, as well as the ability to sling load off a helicopter, and again it looks as though the physics there has been modelled. Everything else aside, I think we can all agree that those are very interesting and exciting improvements to the sim. It should make for some great fun flying. The mission aspect of Flight Simulator X was one of the things that I really enjoyed about that platform. And again, for those of you who do perhaps feel a little bit listless at times within Microsoft Flight Simulator, it should give you a reason to get back into the sim time and time again. Graphically as well, it does look as though there have been some improvements within the sim, although it's always a little bit difficult to tell during a trailer. Of course, the idea there is to sell the product. Anyway, in terms of what I think in summary, I think the fact that we're seeing a new version of the sim is a great thing overall. It certainly shows that Microsoft and Asobo are continuing to support the franchise. I suspect that the vast majority of you watching want Microsoft Flight Simulator to continue to flourish, and this is certainly an indication that that's continuing to be the case. I don't mind as well paying for a new sim every couple of years. Again, that's typically how things worked in the past. There are just one or two areas of concern for me here at the moment. Firstly, no mention during the trailer of any improvements to either the flight modelling, the ground handling. As much as I enjoy the sim, there are still some pretty fundamental issues within Microsoft Flight Simulator in both of those departments. I know that Asobo are aware of them, so I would certainly hope that we see some of those fixed up for 2024. But the fact that there was no mention of that, and given the angle that they've gone for with the trailer, as much as I enjoy using the sim for all sorts of flying, and I'm very happy to see it opening up to a wider demographic, I really hope that both Microsoft and Asobo won't forget that at its very core, this is supposed to be a flight sim. Certainly there are still a lot of questions left unanswered at the moment. Obviously I've just given you my conjecture here today. I'm sure we'll get a lot more info as things continue to progress and as the sim develops. But it's great to see the franchise continue to evolve, and I'm looking forward to many more years of enjoyment within the sim. As always guys, I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. Once again, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support. It is hugely appreciated. I do hope that all of you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.